Hey there, welcome to YouTube. If you are into poetry, if you are into literature, if you are into cultural history, then you've come to the right place. Cardboard Box Productions makes podcasts about all those things, so be sure to click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so that you never miss a new episode. Obviously, we mostly make podcasts, so you can also go to anywhere you get your podcasts, if it's a place other than YouTube, like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and you can subscribe to our podcast feeds there. All right, I hope you enjoy this episode. Hello and welcome to Close Talking, the world's most popular poetry analysis podcast from Cardboard Box Productions Incorporated. I am co-host Jack Rossiter Munley, and with my good friend Connor McNamara Stratton, we read a poem,
talk about the poem,
and read the poem again.
Before we get into today's selection, a quick note that if you like what we do here at Close Talking and have a spare minute of your time, it would mean the world to us if you would give the podcast a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Those ratings and reviews help boost us up the algorithm and find new listeners.
And if you have suggestions for future episodes or comments on this one, you can send us an email at closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com.
And you can also find us on social media. On Twitter, the show is @CloseTalking. I am @Jack Rossiter Munn, and Connor is @ConnorM Stratton. On Instagram, the show is @CloseTalkingPoetry, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/CloseTalking. We also have a website, closetalking.com, where you can find all the past episodes of the show, and Cardboard Box Productions has just launched a newsletter, Unboxed, and if you go to cardboardboxproductionsinc.com, you can subscribe for more behind-the-scenes stuff on Close Talking and all of the other literary and cultural history podcasts that Cardboard Box Productions makes. On with the show. Welcome to another episode of Close Talking with Connor McNamara Stratton
and Jack Rossiter Munley.
Connor is a graduate student, MFA, at the University of Minnesota.
Jack is a freelance writer in New York City. He writes for Troll Tennis. Or no, he's a contributing editor.
I am. That's okay.
You do write, but you're also contributing
That's
editor.
why I'm a contributing editor, because I both edit and contribute.
Oh, contributing. I'd never known the meaning of that phrase.
I don't know if that's really what it is, but that's what I choose to call myself.
That sounds right. Yeah, he also recently wrote at 1 Week 1 Band.
That's true. Did a whole week on Bruce Springsteen. You can find it at oneweekoneband.tumblr.com.
Mm-hmm.
And click on Springsteen.
He is the host of New Books in Foreign Policy podcast.
That is true, for the New Books Network.
He produces Poetry Spoken Here.
I do. That is our sister podcast, which is released on the first and third Friday of every month. And remember, we are the second and fourth Friday of every month. So stay tuned for more good poetry coming your way. If you have not already subscribed on iTunes to either Close Talking or Poetry Spoken Here, pause this podcast right now. Go and do that. We will be here when you get back.
Click that button.
Welcome back. Thank you for going and subscribing. It means a lot to us.
Yes, it does. We've got a great poem this time, as we do every time.
Yeah, they're always great. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, we're at, I guess this is the sixth one.
Yeah, 6.
So we're 6 for 6.
Batting 1,000.
Yeah, this poem is called The Lynching Postcard, Duluth, Minnesota, by Ray Gonzalez, who, as a fun fact, is my professor at the University of Minnesota. And he just came out with a collection of poetry called Beautiful Wall, which this poem is part of, and it won a Minnesota Book Award. Great guy.
Congratulations, Professor Ray Gonzalez.
Yeah. Anyway, I love this poem, and I'm going to read it for you right now.
Oh, thank God.
The Lynching Postcard, Duluth, Minnesota. There is a postcard in an antique shop in Duluth with a photograph of the infamous lynching of a black man carried out in the town in the 1930s. The owner was turned down by eBay when he wanted to sell it there. Tourists walk into his shop and stare at the loan card in the glass case. The owner says it is better to sell it than donate it to a museum where it would be locked away in a drawer. Some people want it removed. Others snicker and stare, shake their heads, and accept the fact that this is only Minnesota. Each morning, the shop owner glances at the case to make sure the postcard is there. Thousands have bowed over the glass. At night, when the shop is closed, the postcard lies in the case, the body hanging in the cold moonlight from Lake Superior, the shadow from the swinging body forming a shape that rises through the glass to darken the shop. Over a dozen people have come across it. They don't know the act of bending over the glass to study the dead body on the pole is forming an invisible arc of light over time, a shadow where those who bow to look imitate the shape of a hanging tree. Yeah. This poem's intense.
Yeah.
Brief, formal context and other contexts. It's in tercets. I tried to read it so that you could get the sense of the tercets.
That is stanzas of 3 lines.
Yes, stanzas of 3 lines. Sorry. It's in
poem chunks of 3 lines.
It's in poem chunks of 3 lines.
Those of us into more informal types of...
we're gonna... Yeah.
Connor is the Mozart to my AC/DC.
Oh, gosh.
I don't want to be AC/DC. I can be Aerosmith. I can accept sleazy Aerosmith. I can't accept AC/DC. That's like a hard rock too far.
Yeah. Tercets, 3 lines. We'll talk... I have some things to say about that later, but anyway, I think it's worth noting so you get a visual. But yeah, so obviously Duluth is in Minnesota, and this postcard, which, there's I think a bunch of them, but there were postcards that got sent around in the 30s, which is just a horrifying fact. Lynchings were public events for entertainment, and so people took pictures of the lynching, and there's just a crowd of white people, and they're all like, some of them are just like smiling at the camera, and then they became postcards, and people would send them around to their friends and family. So that's kind of the historical backdrop that this poem is engaging with.
I think what's really important to note about that as well is that they're from all around the country. So it's not just that there are lynchings in the South and these people are sending these postcards out and around. Like, there are lynchings happening all over the country. They are perceived of as entertainment, and they are then sent by people who live all over the country to their friends and relatives who also live all over the country. So these postcards, in terms of what they represent for history and what they can tell us about the history of the country, is just the depth of racism and the depth of devaluation of African American bodies and lived experience up into the 20th century all across the country. Because it's very easy to just take the Jim Crow South and the segregation there and pack it away into a sort of regional problem. But this really was a pervasive understanding of what white people thought about black people and how white people felt about black people. And that's really, I think, the replicability of postcards, that they could be made over and over and over again, and the fact that they were also communication from one person to another who theoretically are both going to have the same reaction to the postcard, really speaks to the nationwide presence of this kind of racism and hatred.
Totally. And 2 other just like side pieces to note. There's a collection of poetry by Martha Collins called White Papers, which examines, it's a bunch of untitled poems that examine race and racism in the U.S. And she also engages with these postcards. And there's also a great play called An Octoroon by Brandon Jacob Jenkins, which I had the privilege of seeing in New York a couple years ago. That's like a rewriting of a play, like an 18th century Irish play called The Octoroon. Without going too much into it, the new play basically displays one of these postcards in the sort of fourth act, and discusses it and contextualizes it in like a really sophisticated and poignant way. Anyway, it's just there's a lot of contemporary engagement with them, and this is also one of the poems. But I guess like what strikes me about this poem is I think what Jack was talking about with the particular horror of the postcard being a thing is really engaged with here at length, which is you have obviously the horrible atrocity of the fact that lynchings were happening all the time, and interestingly and very sadly, I think at a similar rate as police shootings are happening now.
Oh, wow.
Which is very sad. But the fact that, not just that fact, but then people were photographing that fact and then putting them onto postcards and then distributing them. And so I think one of the cool parts about this poem is it takes the physical fact and environment of one of these postcards very seriously and deliberately. So we have a very grounded setting. There's a postcard in an antique shop in Duluth in the present day. And the poem tracks just the existence of that postcard in the shop. Before the end of the poem, which is we can talk about later, I think just the Gonzalez's attention to certain details that are sort of mundane are what give this poem a particular resonance. Like the owner says it is better to sell it than donate it to a museum where it would be locked away in a drawer.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
Yeah, and disturbing, and also just like thinking about someone's making a commercial choice about this postcard,
which is really the same thing as the creation of the postcard.
Yeah,
that was a commercial choice to make those postcards, and people had to buy them and send them.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
You know, it's the same kind of money exchange and circulation of the image that was going on when it was created. There's no change.
Yeah.
Interesting side note, there is a museum of racist memorabilia in Michigan that has a lot of these kinds of items in its collection.
Jesus Christ.
So in terms of donating to a museum,
if you donate it to that one, it wouldn't be
that
locked
is the
in a
museum
drawer.
where it would not be locked in a drawer, and the context, the curatorial context, would be one to view it in its proper historical setting, and to view it critically, as opposed to view it, you know, just as a curiosity or as something that's then going to be sold eventually.
Right.
Which I would not be surprised if the store owner was unaware of, because I don't think many people have heard of the Museum of Racist Memorabilia.
I have not.
But
is that its proper title?
That is its proper title.
Wow.
It is a fascinating place.
You've been there?
I have been there. It is a really interesting place, and they try to display as much of their collection as possible. Not all of it, but they just have a little display area, and it's jam-packed with a bunch of racist stuff.
Right. And so, yeah, that's the key. That's the distinction that Gonzalez is making. We're not in a setting in the antique shop to view this item critically. We are, the tourists are looking at it as a potential thing to buy or a novelty or a curiosity.
That's
basically.
why I think that I love how clear this poem is and how straightforward it is in relaying what's going on.
Yeah.
And it really is telling you all the ways in which this is no different than how that postcard was originally created and passed around. And that end line about how everyone who's bending over it is making the shape of a hanging tree, really sort of saying, you are hanging this man over and over again. You're doing the same thing.
Yeah. Right.
I think that line just sort of throws back on the rest of the poem that idea, because at first when you have all these people coming through and looking at it, some want it removed, like it's really, the story it seems to be telling is of a lot of people coming to look at the postcard, and you don't know. When I was reading through it the first time and saw the bending over, I was thinking of bending over like in prayer, and it's almost a commemorative act to look at it, but the setting is all wrong. You already know that, so it's a little jarring to think about. And then at the end, he really brings it full circle and lets you know
it's not commemorative. Even the people who are looking at it and thinking, this is deplorable, this is the worst thing I've ever seen, that happened to people who saw these postcards back when they were being created.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't change the fact that there was an audience for them,
Right.
or a commercial market for them. It
Right.
just meant that there were some people who were horrified by them.
Right. Yeah. Which you, I think, alluded to, the withholding of judgment that happens in the poem, and the keeping to description until the very end. It's not until the last 5 lines when they don't know the act of bending over the glass to study the dead body on the pole is forming an invisible arc of light over time, a shadow where those who bow to look imitate the shape of a hanging tree. It's not until those last 5 lines that the speaker comes out and makes a sort of claim about the reality that he has just described. And I think that the clear and the slow, deliberate descriptions sort of like they make that claim at the end, powerful, and also sort of you buy it by that point, because
Right.
you've been
a witness to what's happening.
Yeah, you feel like, in the middle, you're in the shop yourself, basically, because
It really feels like he's contextualizing an experience you've just had.
Yeah.
In some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, the line that really, or the stanza that gets me is, some people want it removed, others snicker and stare, shake their heads, and accept the fact this is only Minnesota.
Yeah, I know.
So the beginning of that,
Brutal.
those first 2 lines is like, yeah, some people don't want it there. Some people are like, are you kidding me? Like, what is this? And then that last line,
Right, because
that's where it gets a little insidious.
Yeah. Right, because Minnesota has this rep of being just this benign state where there's no problems except maybe too much cheese curd intake or something.
Couple too many lakes per capita.
Way too many lakes.
A lot of lakes, a lot of politeness,
Right.
some very good pie.
Right. Also, if it's tourists walking in, it's like, well, maybe these are like enlightened people from New York or something, which we are, by the way, who are coming to this, stupid state. This
Flyover. It's a
flyover state. Only Minnesota. It's so cold there. When I moved to Minnesota, everyone was like, "You're going to Minnesota? Aren't you going to be cold?"
Oh my god, you're going to be so cold.
You're gonna
Pack
be
your warmest coat, Connor.
Oh my god.
Oh my god.
And then when Sarita, my girlfriend, told her bosses that she was moving, they were like, "You're moving to Minnesota? It's so cold." And then she was like, "Yeah, but my boyfriend's pursuing poetry there." It's like, you're moving for your boyfriend who's doing poetry?
Oh my god, you're going to be poor and cold for the rest of your life, honey.
Yeah.
You need to find a nice investment banker and settle down here in the city. Pursue your psychology. Don't do that, by the way, Sarita. Connor's a real catch. You'll never do better.
Oh, I mean, she was like, I think it's great. He's very talented. And they were dumbstruck. Sarita, you're the best. I love you.
This podcast is dedicated to you.
Always.
Every single time. All the podcasts are dedicated to Sarita.
Oh, she's the love of my life. I actually, interestingly, I also love the stanza after that. Each morning, the shop owner glances at the case to make sure the postcard is there. That's like, I don't know, that's such a detail where you're not, I don't know, when people, generalization, but like conversations about the postcard is always about just the horrible reference that the postcard makes to a horrible past. And just the idea of the attentiveness of this owner to like making sure no one steals it or something, and treating it like it's, one of his products.
When it's an everyday action too. It's unthinking, it's unfeeling, it's the
Right.
kind of mechanical. You walk in the store, you make sure the postcard's there, you check the cash register, you put the money in.
Yeah.
Like, it's part of his daily routine. He's completely desensitized to anything this postcard might stand for.
Yeah.
He's just viewing it as another box to check on his morning routine.
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah. It reminds me of, have you seen Hunger by Steve McQueen? It's about the Irish hunger strike. So good. But one of the really cool formal parts of that movie is it opens with this guy who's like one of the guards at the the place where they're holding the hunger strikers. I guess they haven't hunger striked yet. But anyway, the IRA. But you don't know he's like a guard in the beginning of the movie. So the movie opens with this guy just washing his hands and his face, which you see have a little bit of blood on you, but it's like this, you don't know the context. And then the movie moves into the next part of his day, and all this shit happens, and he beats the living daylights out of this guy. And then, like 30 minutes later, it basically is the same shot of him washing his hands again. And that's was a really cool directorial move to basically impress the fact that this is just daily life. All of it is, and he's just rinsing his hands and going about every day. So that reminded me of that.
And there's a real horror in that.
Yeah.
I mean, just repeating these kinds of unthinking actions that have such big moral or ethical implications.
Yeah, the banality of evil.
Right. If
I'm going to be that guy.
Yeah.
Hannah Arendt.
Yeah, no, be that guy.
That's
Give us a little bit of what that guy has to say.
I actually have no idea, but she wrote about...
That officially made you not that guy.
I'm not that guy.
I'm going to be that guy in a minute.
I want to be that guy, but yeah, she wrote about... She was writing about the Holocaust. She was writing about that one Eichmann. Is that his name? And the conclusion of the thesis of her book was basically not that there was this evil scheme to kill everyone, but that normal people were just doing their jobs, and in doing their jobs committed genocide.
There's to reference another film, there is the film Doubt, I want to say it was called, with Viggo Mortensen. And he plays a Nazi who wrote a paper about some medical stuff. The party loves it because it indicates Aryan supremacy. The whole movie basically takes you into his inculcation into the Nazi party and cause, and his work is sort of used as the philosophical and academic underpinnings for the Holocaust. And then the last shot of the film is a huge, a long extended tracking shot that is just him walking around a concentration camp and clearly just being confronted with what he unwittingly, unthinkingly, through the everyday actions of his life, has given the justification for and has played a major part in creating, and he's sort of confronted with what he's done. In the interest of also not having Connor be that guy, and apparently solidifying my place as that guy, as I'm about to be that guy 2 podcasts in a row, another thing that this brings up is Judith Butler's idea of grievability, that there are certain lives and certain bodies and certain instances where death is more grievable. And she talks about this in a lot of different settings, but I feel like it comes up here in the sense that this is a death. This is a person who died, and that person's death has been reduced to a postcard because in the 1930s black lives were not grievable.
Right. And
it has a lot of resonance now because in a lot of instances of police brutality, black lives are still not grievable, and if you come out and say that Black Lives Matter, that is somehow regarded as a radical statement. And at the end of this poem, and throughout the poem, we're seeing that this life is still not being grieved. It's being looked at from a distance through glass. It's being seen as two-dimensional as the postcard. It's not being given sort of the full grievability that it could have. And it ends with these people essentially, through their viewing in this dispassionate way, hanging a whole human again and again and again because they're taking away the life that is encompassed with this body.
And interestingly, the shape of a hanging tree. So it's the tree, they are creating the structure that allows the hanging. So, and I had mentioned tercets, back to tercets. This is a very small point, but one thing that I like about the formal thing, and I think this is a small move, 9 3-line stanzas. The first 5 stanzas are all their own units, which is to say the end of the stanza is also an end of a sentence. They're like mini paragraphs. And then in the 6th stanza, which begins at night when the shop is closed, the postcard lies in the case, the body hanging in the cold moonlight from Lake Superior. Then we have a new stanza, but we have a continuing of the sentence. The shadow from the swinging body forming a shape that rises through the glass to darken the shop. And then again, over a dozen people have come across it. They don't know the act of bending over the glass to study the dead body on the pole is forming. Then we have a new stanza, an invisible arc of light over time, a shadow where those about to look imitate the shape of a hanging tree. And I think those are small moves, but it's by setting up the first 5 stanzas to be their own discrete units, and then at a point that's I think a thematic shift where it's the night of the shop and things get a little less sort of like realistic, where the body,
shadow suddenly expands to encompass all the people who are bending over, creating a different shadow.
Right. The stanzas begin to flow together, become less discrete. And I don't think that has like mimetic, like a miming meaning or anything, but I think that rhythmically Gonzalez is shifting the rhythm of the poem to signal a thematic shift, which I think works well. And I don't think sort of like draws attention to itself, but I think that when you read it, you are like unconsciously being pulled after in the cold moonlight from Lake Superior and to study the dead body on the pole is forming into the last stanza. And that, I think that pull generates a lot of the poignancy and resonance of the end that he has withheld from the beginning of the poem.
Definitely. Yeah, it's really interesting that shift occurs when it does, because it is sort of this expanding of reality along with the expanding of the sentences and the expanding of those individual verses.
Yeah.
Great.
Very
Let's
good.
hear it again.
All right. The Lynching Postcard, Duluth, Minnesota. There is a postcard in an antique shop in Duluth with a photograph of the infamous lynching of a black man carried out in the town in the 1930s. The owner was turned down by eBay when he wanted to sell it there. Tourists walk into his shop and stare at the lone card in the glass case. The owner says it is better to sell it than donate it to a museum where it would be locked away in a drawer. Some people want it removed. Others snicker and stare, shake their heads, and accept the fact that this is only Minnesota. Each morning, the shop owner glances at the case to make sure the postcard is there. Thousands have bowed over the glass. At night, when the shop is closed, the postcard lies in the case, the body hanging in the cold moonlight from Lake Superior, the shadow from the swinging body forming a shape that rises through the glass to darken the shop. Over a dozen people have come across it. They don't know the act of bending over the glass to study the dead body on the pole is forming an invisible arc of light over time, a shadow where those who bow to look imitate the shape of a hanging tree.
This is co-host Jack Rossiter Munley. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, head on over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. 5 stars maybe? Those reviews help with the algorithm and are a great way for us to find new listeners. And you can put anything in them. You can write whatever you want. You can just say, oh, this is a good podcast. I like this podcast. You could be like, hey, that Connor guy, he makes a lot of good points. Jack, why is he doing this outro so long? You know, get him off the mic. And whatever you feel like writing, head on over there, 5 stars, drop in the review. Do you have thoughts about this poem? Is there a poem or poet you'd like us to cover on a future episode? Well, we'd love to hear from you. And there are tons of ways that you can get in touch with us. I mean, I guess you could drop it into an iTunes review. You could be like 5 stars. Hey, why don't you talk about insert name of poet here? But you can also send us an email. That's probably the best way to do it. closetalkingpoetry@gmail.com is our email address. Or you can find us on Twitter. I am at Jack Rossiter Munn. Connor is at Connor M. Stratton. And the show is at Close Talking. On Instagram, you can find us there too. We are at Close Talking Poetry. And we are on Facebook at facebook.com/closetalking. We haven't gotten to TikTok yet, and we might never. Who knows? Anything's possible. Speaking of all those social media platforms, a very special thank you to our incredible social media manager, Corey Chena, who keeps us active across the internet. And a thank you to all of you for listening. We will see you next time.